I have here pockets F and G. Those pockets are going to go in the lining of the bag. We do not put any pleats in these pockets, so I just want you to put those aside right now. We will be taking out the other pockets that we need to be pleating. I have one of my pockets now, and by now you should have stitched in the ditch across every one of your pockets, and you should have also basted closed the bottom of your pocket. Well, this is pocket C, and this is going to go on the side of your bag. There are 2 pocket C's, one for each side of the bag, and they are pleated pockets, and I'm going to show you right now how to mark and prepare the pocket to go over to the sewing machine to sew your pleats. What you want to do is take your gridded ruler and line it up from the edge of the pocket. Now we mark these lines after your side seam has been sewn. Never, never, never mark these chalk lines before you sew your side seams. They're always taken after the side seam is sewn and after the pocket is turned right side out. So we mark a chalk line 1.5 inches from this edge, and now I'm going to mark another chalk line 1.5 inches from this edge. So I line my ruler up. And I mark my line. So now I have 2 chalk lines here, both 1.5 inches from the edge. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to fold on that line, and then I'm going to press it. I give it a lot of steam. I want a nice sharp crease there. Press it on both sides. Then I do the same thing with this side. I fold back on the chalk line. You're going to see soon it's starting to look like a pocket. Lots of steam. And go ahead and steam both sides. Now you might want to let that cool a little bit because after you steam it, it gets pretty hot. Next thing that you want to do once it's cooled down is you want to take this end, you want the main fabric facing down, and now you want to take that little flap, that little fold, and you want to fold it one more time out to the edge of the pocket. And you'll see when I'm done here that this actually forms a little pleat. I turn it and I do the same thing on the other side. I take that first fold and I fold the end back to the fold line. A lot of the way I sew and create different things actually comes from my garment construction background. This is exactly the way we would form pleats if we were sewing different garments. Now, you can see how that little accordion shape forms the pleat for the pocket. The next thing that we want to mark are chalk lines for sewing. Because what we're going to do when we go back to the sewing machine is we're going to stitch a line as close as we possibly can get to the edge here. I like to go 1/8 of an inch. And then we will also mark a sewing line on this side of the pleat. 1/8 of an inch. So I just take my ruler and I line it up 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and I mark a chalk line. So you can see now I have this chalk line right here, 1/8 of an inch from this folded edge, and that will be my sewing line. Now I'm going to mark another line 1/8 of an inch from the other folded edge. Now I have another sewing line. Now I turn over and I want to mark 1/8 inch from this edge and 1/8 inch from that edge. Okay, so there's my 1/8 inch sewing line right there. Now we're marking on the folded edge, okay? It's always on the folded edge. We marked on this folded edge and this folded edge. And I just have one more left to mark. So now I have another sewing line marked out. You should have 4, 2 on this side and 2 on this side. You can see it's starting to look like a little pocket that has these pleats in it. Now remember, there are 2 PCs, so I want you to go and mark out your other PC, prepare it exactly the way we did this one, and then we're going to go through every pleated pocket. After PC, we have 2 more pleated pockets to work on. I have pocket D here. Pocket D is another pleated pocket, and it's going to go on the front bag flap. Now, I've already stitched in the ditch, and I have already basted closed the bottom of the pocket. Now I should also point out to you that since I had a different color for my contrast, I used thread in my bobbin that matched my contrast and thread in the top of my machine that matched my main fabric. So we're going to go ahead and mark this for pleating. What we want to do again is mark a 1.5 inch line from the edge. Remember, mark these after your side seams have been sewn, not before. We're going to mark another chalk line 1.5 inches from the opposite end. So now you should have 2 chalk marks. They're both 1.5 inches in from the side of the pocket. I fold back on my chalk line just like I did on pocket C. Press it. Flip it. Press it. Now I'm going to fold back on this chalk line. Press it. Flip it and press it. And just like we did with pocket C, now I'm going to take this edge and fold it up to that first fold line. And press it. Lots of steam. Turn it one more time. Fold this end up to this fold line. Press. Last thing for us to do to prepare this pocket is to mark our chalk lines 1/8 inch from the folded edges, and those will be our sewing lines. Going to turn it, mark again 1/8 inch from the folded line. Then I'm going to turn to the contrast side, and I'm going to be marking in 1/8 inch from this folded line. And 1/8 inch in from this folded line. So now you should have 4 chalk lines marked, 2 on this side and 2 on this side, and they're all 1/8 of an inch in from the fold. Now I have piece B here, and piece B is going to become the 2 front pleated pockets on the bag. We make those 2 pockets from this one piece. Now you should have already stitched in the ditch, and you should have already basted closed the bottom of the pocket. We're going to make a series of chalk lines on this piece. The first chalk line is going to be 1.5 inches from the outer edge of the pocket. So go ahead and put your chalk line there. So here we have the line 1.5 inches out from the edge. The next chalk line is going to be 6.5 inches from the edge of the pocket. Now with this particular pocket, we're always measuring from the edge into wherever our measurement needs to be. And right now we're doing the 6.5 inch mark. So here is your mark, that's 6.5 inches from the edge. Now we want to mark the last one on this side 8 inches in from that same edge. So line up your ruler, try and keep all your marks square and perpendicular. So this is the mark that's 8.5 inches from the edge. So 3 marks from the edge on this side. The first one is 1.5 inches from the edge. The second one is 6.5 inches from the edge. And the last one is 8 inches from the edge. Now we move to the other side of the pocket. And we're going to do the same measurements on this side. Our first one is going to be 1.5 inches in from the edge. The second one is going to be 6.5 inches in from the edge. And the last one is going to be 8 inches in from the edge. Okay, so now what we have from this edge is a line, your first line 1.5 inches from that edge, the next line 6.5 inches from that edge, and your last line 8 inches from the edge. Now that you have your chalk lines marked, what you want to do is fold this first chalk line, the one that's 1.5 inches from the edge, you want to fold it down and press it, just like we did for the other pleated pockets. The next pleat that we need to make here is done a little bit differently. What we want to do is fold this line right here, and then we're going to move it over until it meets this line. So the fold from this line will be placed right on this line, and I'm going to show that to you right now. I fold this way, and then I move it over until that fold sits on that chalk line that's 8 inches out from the edge. And once I have that in place, I can press it. So now that it's pressed, let me show you again. I have the fold line here on the 6.5 inch line, and I moved that fold over to let it touch the 8 inch line right there. Now I'm working at the other end of pocket B, and I'm going to make my first fold on that line that's 1.5 inches out from the edge. So I fold it back and I press it. Now we're going to do that second pleat here, It's done the same way that we did the one for this side. You want to fold back this way, and then you want to move that line, that fold line, until it meets the 8-inch chalk line. And then you press. So now we have both of these pockets with their fold meeting the 8-inch fold line. Now there's one last fold that we need to put in here, so we're going to turn this to the contrast side. And what we simply want to do now is take this edge and match it up to the fold. Press it. And then we take this edge and match it up to the fold. So what you should have now are your two front pleated pockets. You have this pocket here. That pleat gives the little accordion shape. And then you have the other pocket on this side. And after everything is stitched, this little piece right here is a nice handy place to slip your pens or other small thin items that you need. Last thing that we need to do now is mark 1/8 inch seam lines. We're going to start with just this spot here. We're going to mark 1/8 inch lines here, 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 and here. So I just take my ruler, measure in 1/8 of an inch for a stitching line. And I do this one here. Now, if you do not want to mark chalk lines for your stitching line, that's fine. Figure out where you need to line your foot up on your sewing machine with this piece, and use your presser foot as your guide for your 1/8 inch lines. Mark my last one over here. So you should have your 4 1/8 inch stitching lines in these spots here. Now I'm going to flip it over. And we're going to mark 4 more lines. The first one will be on this folded edge here. The next one is on this folded edge here. The next one will be on this folded edge here. And your last one will be on this folded edge here. So now on this side, you should have 4 stitching lines on your folds. Here, 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 and here. And now we're actually ready to go and sew all the pleats into our pockets. I'm going to show you how to sew the stitching lines for the pleats. The reason why we do this is we want these pleats to be permanent. These folds, may start to come out over time. So if we stitch down right through the fold, those pleats will be permanent in here. I'm going to be stitching with a stitch length of 2.5 again. Now, this is where you want to really make sure that you have that sharp needle in there. And sharp is a type of needle. You want to use a sharp 9014. From here on out, we're going to be working with some thickness in our bag, and you want that sharp needle so that it can puncture all the layers easily for you. Make sure that when you put this in that you're not catching this. So you want to fold this back right here because you don't want to catch anything over here. So I'm putting it into the machine. Now, I'm using my open toe foot again, and if you don't want to mark a chalk line, what you need to do is you need to get the foot, the presser foot that you want to use, and figure out what would give you an 1/8 inch. The opening here in my open toe foot is 1/4 inch. So if I place the inside leg of that presser foot right along the edge here, and if my needle is in center position, that is actually going to give me my 1/8 inch. So you don't need to mark these if you don't want to. I just marked them to be clear for you, and you can go and look at your presser feet at home and decide how you can line up that presser foot to give you the 1/8 inch without going ahead and marking anything. So we do want to back stitch. And just stay on that line. And back stitch at the end. Now I'm going to take my work out. Okay, and again I want to show you that I folded this completely back, so I did not catch this edge here in my seam. It's still completely free, and that's how you want it to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew the pleat on the other side, and again I folded this completely out of the way. Back stitch. Back stitch. Now I need to turn the piece over, and I need to sew my 1/8 inch lines here and here. So I'm going to fold this open. I don't want to catch anything underneath here. I just want to sew this fold. So I put it into my machine. I back stitch. And I sew down the entire length of that fold. Now you want to go ahead and sew down the fold on this side. Make sure that you're only catching the fold and nothing else on the pocket. So now you have your pocket sewn with your pleats in. Those pleats will never come out. And you've sewed in the folds on this side also. This is pocket C. You have one more pocket C. Go ahead and prepare that one exactly the way you did this one. I'm going to sew down the pleats on pocket D now. The pleats on pocket D are sewed the same exact way that we sewed them on pocket C, so go ahead and work on that one. I'm going to sew the pleats into pocket B now. We're just going to sew the 4 chalk lines that are on the folds. Those are the only ones we're going to sew right now. Now just to clarify, these two chalk lines here, these were the ones that we measured 8 inches out from each edge. You do not want to sew anything on this line yet. We will use those later, but right now you're going to ignore these. So I'm going to sew on my first fold, and again I'm folding this completely back. I don't want to catch anything here. I just want to catch this fold. Just put it in my machine. A back stitch. Sew down the length of the fold. Back stitch. I'm going to go to my next fold, and I'm going to sew this fold down. Now I move over to the next fold, which is going to be right here, and I'm going to sew that one down. Now I'm going to sew the last fold in place. Now I've sewed in the first 4 folds of our pleats. So you should have a sewing line here, 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 and here. And in case you need to know for more clarification, this was the fold that we made at 1.5 inches. This is the fold that we made at 6.5 inches. Then from the other side, this is the fold at 1.5 inches. This is the fold at 6.5 inches. Those are the folds that you should have sewn in right now. Now I've turned pocket B over, and I'm going to sew the 4 fold lines that we marked before with our chalk. So I'll be sewing this fold, this fold, this fold, and this fold right here. I'll start with my first fold. Make sure it's just the fold that you're sewing, that nothing's getting caught behind it. Now I'm going to sew down this second fold right here. Now I'm going to sew this third fold right here. Put it in the machine in whatever direction you're comfortable with. Don't worry about always sewing in one direction. It doesn't really matter for this project. And now we have one last fold to sew, and it's this fold right here. So now what you should have from your contrast side are the 4 folds sewn, 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to go ahead now and sew our pocket flaps. I have the first small one here. What I've done is I've darkened all of the lines for you so that you can see a little better. And I just want to reiterate to you one more time how we came up with these lines. We started out with our rectangle. Then we took our rectangle and we divided it exactly in half with this line here. Then I measured up from the bottom of the rectangle up 3/4 of an inch, and I drew this line right here. Then I drew a diagonal line from this line right here where the 3/4 inch comes into the side, and I drew that right down to the center. And then I drew another diagonal line from the center all the way back up to that 3/4 inch mark. Then, after I had these lines drawn in here, I went and I marked in 1/2 inch from those outside lines, which became my stitching lines, which are right here. Now, we're going to be sewing on the stitching lines. We do not sew across the top of this pocket. Also, I'm stitching each pocket flap to its contrasting piece. So I'm going to put this into my machine. Again, I'm working with a stitch length of 2.5. I'm set at a straight stitch in center needle position. And I'm still using my open toe foot. I stitch, I back stitch, I'm working in a needle down position, so when I get to the end of that stitching line, I can pivot and start stitching on my diagonal line. Pivot, I'm going to stitch the second diagonal line. Pivot, stitch the last side line there. Back stitch. And then we're done stitching that first pocket flap. Now go ahead and sew all the other pocket flaps the same way that you just sewed this one. Now we're going to sew the larger of the pocket flaps, but we do it in exactly the same way. You're just going to stitch on these stitching lines right here. You do not sew across the top. And I do have the contrast attached, and we put right sides together here. So I put it in my machine. Back stitch, pivot, pivot. And pivot one last time. Back stitch, and you're done. Now we're going to go over to the cutting and ironing board, and we're going to finish these up. It's time to start more work on our pocket flaps. What I want to do is I want to trim away all of the cutting lines. So I'm going to be cutting here, 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 and here. So I'll begin that now. Just line up with your cutting line, trim off. If you're not exactly on the cutting line here, no big deal, nothing to worry about. Now if your blade starts to get dull, go ahead and change it. Like I said before, it's dangerous to work with a dull blade. Just don't throw them in the garbage. I have this terrible fear of throwing them in the garbage, and some poor sanitation engineer is going to get snagged, and I won't be able to live with myself. So I actually save them all in a big jar. I have loads of dead blades in a big jar at home. One of these days when I die, you can bury me with them because I don't want them in the garbage. We have our pocket trimmed, and now the next thing I want to do is I want to trim out these corners. So I'm just going to sort of show you where I'm going to cut. I do sort of a little arc shape, but I make sure that I don't cut into that corner stitching line there. You don't want to do that. If you do that, your pocket's wrecked. So be very careful when you're cutting here. You don't have to mark this. I'm just marking so that you can have a little visual to see how I'm cutting, the shape that I'm cutting out here. And this is to take the bulk out of the corners. So now I'll go ahead and cut that for you. And as long as we're on the topic of dyeing, I've made so many bags over the past 20 years. I don't really have any of them. I've given them all away. And I've always told people my one rule is if you get one of my bags, you have to come to my funeral and bring the bag with you. So if you guys out there are making this bag, you need to come to my funeral and bring the bag with you. Here's what your pocket flap should look like with all of those corners and points taken out. Now you just need to go and prepare each pocket flap exactly the way we prepared this one. We have one more step to do before we can turn the pocket right sides out. So what I would like you to do is open your seams and press them down well with your steam iron. So open each one, press. Okay, then I want you to flip it over, and I want you to press these ones open on the contrast side. It's well worth having a good steam iron. If you don't already have one, it would be really wonderful to save up and purchase yourself a good steam iron. It's like having a sharp rotary blade. It makes your life so much easier. Now that we have it pressed, we're just going to take it and we are going to turn it right side out. Push out your points with your fingers to start. Then you want to go ahead and take a point turner and stick it in there, and you're going to very gently push those points out so that you have nice square corners and nice sharp points. Now you don't want to get too aggressive with that, because if you do, you will find a way to poke a hole right through that seam. Remember, we trimmed away the corners there, so that's a weak spot. So you just want to go very gently with it. If you do poke a hole, sometimes you can go back and restitch and fix it up a little bit. Sometimes you can't. If it happens, it happens. It happens to all of us. Just go ahead and don't get frustrated and make yourself another piece. Now that I've done that, I kind of roll this seam with my fingers, and I want that stitching line to be right in the center of both pieces. I don't want it to be this way. I don't want to see any purple on the top, and I don't want to see any green on the bottom. I just want them to meet right there in the center. And once you have that done and you're happy with it, go ahead and press. Work out all your seams that way. Just roll them until they get to the center. You can go back in with the point turner if you need to. Push a little bit more. Roll that seam. Press it. So work all the way around your flap until it's done. And go ahead and prepare all your flaps in exactly the same way as you did this one. Before we move over to the sewing machine, we need to fasten our magnetic snaps to the flaps. I'm using the Clover snaps. They're magnetic. They're 1/2 inch in diameter. They come with 4 pieces in the package. They have the male part, the female part, and 2 discs, one for each part, to fasten the snap into place. Now, I already put one on here on one of the flaps. Now, I understand that this is my main fabric, but this fabric is actually going to be against the bag. We're not actually going to see this one. Whichever fabric is going to lay against the bag, that's the side that you put the fleece on. The fleece needs to be there to give strength to the fabric because we are putting the magnetic snap on there. So when this piece is on the bag, it will actually be positioned this way. So when you're looking at the bag, you're going to see this on the outside. You're going to see the contrast fabric. If you had wanted to put the main fabric facing out, then you would have put the fleece on this contrast piece here. So what I'm trying to tell you is whichever fabric you want to look at when you're looking at the bag with the flap on, do not put the fleece on that fabric. The fleece needs to go on the fabric that's laying against the bag. Now I'm going to show you how to mark for the snap placement. On the flap, we're only going to use the male piece. So we're going to take the female piece away right now. And I'm going to move the other piece aside. I take my ruler. I am lining the point up with the edge of my ruler here, and I have the edge of the flap along a straight line, and I mark the center. Now I want to measure up from the point of the flap. I want to measure up 3/4 of an inch and put a little crosshatch there. So I'm 3/4 of an inch up from the point. I mark my crosshatch. So what I have is the line dividing the flap in half and my little crosshatch 3/4 of an inch up from the point. I take my snap, which again is the male piece. I place it on the crosshatch line. I'm placing the prongs, these prongs right here, onto the crosshatch line. And I am just sort of making a little indentation with those prongs. I know that you can't see those, so I'm just going to take a black Sharpie and mark them for you so that you can see them. On those black lines, I have some very nice sharp scissors. I'm going to open up this pocket. Now, you don't want to go through all the layers here. You only want to go through the fabric that has the fleece on it. And you're going to poke in with your scissors and just do a little snip, just big enough to take those prongs. So I have two little slits in there now. I'm taking the male snap, I'm slipping the prongs into those slits. If it doesn't go through for you the first time, it means you didn't cut all the way. So you just go and open that up just a little bit. Slip your prongs in. And here it is on the other side. Take the little piece, the cap, slip it over the prongs, just like that, and then you're going to bend those prongs down. Bend them down nice and tight to secure your snap in place. Then you can turn it back, right sides out. There's your snap. You're going to take that and put it in your pile. Next stop for this little piece is the sewing machine. Now, go ahead and prepare all of your flaps exactly the same way. I'm going to top stitch the pocket flap now. And top stitching is always 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. So I put in my 1/4 inch piecing foot. I'm still at a 2.5 stitch length with a straight stitch, center needle position. I'm going to sew around this side, this side, this side, and this side. And we do this with the snap side up. I put some purple thread into my bobbin to match the purple contrast on this side, and I'm leaving my green thread in the top. Pivot. We sew this with the snap side up. Back stitch. I want you to take this out, snip your threads, and then I just want you to baste along the top. Do it maybe at 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric here. You don't have to back stitch, this is just basting. And then you're done with that flap. Now you can go ahead and top stitch all your flaps and baste the tops closed the same way that I just did this. You should have 2 pieces of faux suede marked piece K. They have shirt tailor interfacing fused to the wrong side of them. These are your strap anchors, and we're going to go and start sewing these together and getting them ready to put onto the sides of the bag. What I'd like you to do is take your ruler and on just one of the longer edges, mark a line 5/8 of an inch away from the edge. Then you're going to fold it in half, and you're going to sew on this 5/8 inch line. That's your seam line for the strap anchors. Now, up until now, we've been sewing mostly with 1/2 inch seams. This one will be at 5/8 of an inch. Do that to both of your anchors. I'm going to go ahead now and sew the strap anchors. So I have the first one in my machine, and I will be sewing 5/8 of an inch in from the edge. If you marked a line for yourself, go ahead and follow that line. Stitch length of 2.5. Back stitch, and that's the first one. And now I'm going to go ahead and sew the second one. You go ahead and sew yours too. We just finished sewing our strap anchors, and now I want to show you how to turn these inside out. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the seam this way, and I'm going to take a piece of muslin and throw that over because I don't want to sew directly onto the faux suede. I'm sorry, I don't want to iron directly onto the faux suede. And I press it. Then I have this really great tool. It's called a fast turn tool, and it takes tubes and it turns them inside out. You slip the tool into the tube that you created, and you want to take some of this fabric and cover it over the hole. So I just slip it back down and I cover the hole. Then you take this little rod. It has a very pointy end on the tip. And you slip that into the tool and you try and poke a hole through the strap. Now you turn it clockwise, and you keep poking and turning until it actually pulls through the fabric. Okay, now we've poked through the top of the fabric, and I did that just by ramming it up into the fabric and turning this clockwise. And then it just is like a corkscrew. It'll just go right through. Now with the faux suede is a little tough, so it's a little bit harder to get this through, but you can get it through. So just work at it. Then once you have it through, you start to pull that rod out of the bottom of the tube. And you pull hard and you push on the tube, you push up on your fabric tube as you're pulling down on the rod. And then it comes through the other end and it's turned inside out for you. Then to get the tip out, you turn it counterclockwise and it comes out. Take off all your little dots that you have there. Now you straighten out your tube. We ironed our seams flat, so they should fall flat now that this tube is turned right side out. And they are. I don't trim those seams. I leave those seams just as they are. Then I take my muslin, I'm going to throw it over the tube, and I press it down. Now, this is my preferred way to do any kind of a strap. I like to make the tubes and then I like to turn them right side out. I know that there are a lot of methods out there with folding fabric, and if you prefer one of those methods, you go ahead and use one of those. I'm not going to show you how to do any of those there because this is my favorite way to do it. If you do decide to do the folding method, you want to follow the instructions for that, and you want to fold it and sew it so that this width right here, this width, will go through a 2-inch anchor. By now you should have completed turning both of your anchors, and I just want to show you, in case you decide not to use this method, in case you decide to use one of those folding methods for your anchors and your straps, this is the hardware that we're using for our anchor, and it has a 2-inch opening in here. So you want that strap and that strap anchor to be able to fit through that hole after you're done with all of your folding. We have the bag strap here, and I want to remind you that when you are fusing your fleece to the faux suede, you want to come 1 inch in from each end with your fleece. So in other words, the last inch of each end of the strap should not have any fleece fused to it. So I'm marking my 5/8 inch seam line, and I'll mark that all the way down the length of the strap. And once I have that marked, I'll fold this in half and pin it. Then I'll go to my sewing machine. I'm going to sew down the entire length of the strap. I have the shoulder strap in the sewing machine now. I have the right sides together. We're going to sew in 5/8 of an inch from the edge of the shoulder strap. So I'm using the open toe foot. I'm set at a stitch length of 2.5, and I'm on a straight stitch in the center needle position. And you're going to start at the beginning, and this is the part where no fleece was fused to the shoulder strap. And we're going to sew down the length of the entire strap with that 5/8 inch seam. So just go ahead, sew down, follow your black line. The seam has been sewed on our shoulder strap, and now I'm going to press that open. Remember to put the little press cloth, the little piece of muslin, over the strap because you don't want to iron directly on that faux suede. So I want you to iron down the entire length of the strap. I just finished pressing open my seam along the entire length of the bag strap. We're going to put the tool inside the faux suede tube that we've created, and we want to push it down. And you have to push it down really hard because it's very long. So just keep going until you get to the top. It will fit. The strap is on the tube, and now I'm going to put in the wire portion of the fast turn tool. I'm going to poke it into that little piece of faux suede that's on the top that doesn't have the fusible fleece in it, and you just trying to ram it up there and push it through. And you're turning clockwise as you're pushing. And now I start to draw it back down into the tube. I'm pulling on the wire at the bottom, and I'm pushing up a little bit with my hand here to help guide it over the tube. And now it's out the other end, and I can just pull. And there it is, turned right side out. And now we're going to flatten it all out and press it. Remember to keep that covered with your little piece of muslin. This faux suede is, by the way, washable and dryable. I have all my pieces turned inside out now, the strap anchors and the bag strap. Now we're going to go on each one of these pieces and we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Now, let me give a little bit of explanation for some of you who may not have a background. What is the difference between top stitching and edge stitching? When we talk about garment construction, when you see a pattern that says top stitching, it always means that you sew 1/4 of an inch in from the edge. If it's edge stitching means you sew as close to the edge as you possibly can. Probably more like 1/8 of an inch, maybe to a 1/16 of an inch, but as close to that edge as you can possibly get. That's edge stitching. What we're doing is top stitching. So right now what you can do is you have a couple of options. You can go ahead and mark your 1/4 inch lines on here with a chalk wheel and just use that as your guide. Or you can go ahead and use a 1/4 of an inch piecing foot, and with your 1/4 inch piecing foot, run the edge, of course, right at the edge of the fabric here. So those are a few options for you. Now let's go ahead and top stitch these pieces. The first strap anchor is in the machine, and now I'm going to do my top stitching on it. I've changed to black thread in both my top and my bobbin, and I've put in a 1/4 inch piecing foot, so I won't be working with chalk lines here. I'm just going to ride the edge of the 1/4 inch foot along the edge of the strap. And I'll be working with a stitch of 2.5. Back stitch. Just keep everything lined up. Back stitch. And I have that first line in there. And now I'm going to go and sew the other side. And there I have top stitched the other side. Now I want you to go ahead and I want you to sew the other anchor the same exact way, top stitch it the same way, and then I want you to go and start working on the bag strap. We're going to move over to the bag flap now, and this is the flap that goes over your bag and closes it. This is piece I, so I want you to pull out piece I right now. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to mark a chalk line 2.5 inches up from the bottom edge. Now, you want it to be on the edge where you marked your little circle. You place your ruler on, and you go ahead and mark with chalk. And now what I'd like you to do is mark in 2 3/4 inches from each end. This is just a little registration mark for placing the pocket onto the flap. It doesn't have to be anything long or fancy. It's just a little guideline. Then you'll be taking your pocket and you're going to place it in between those registration lines to center the pocket. And you want this raw edge even with the chalk line that you drew at 2.5 inches. So I have my basting tape here, and I'm going to turn the pocket upside down, and the basting tape gets placed right on the edge. So that edge right there. Press it down nicely. And then you're going to place another piece on the opposite edge. Press it down nice and firm. Now we'll go ahead and remove the paper. Okay, I'm finishing removing the paper from both sides. I turn my pocket back over, and I'm going to place it once again between those registration lines with the raw edge on this chalk line right here. And I'm just going to press it down here. Now I'm going to take a couple of pins and I'm just going to secure the bottom here. Now that we have this pocket in place and secured down with the basting tape and the pins, what we're going to do is we'll go to the sewing machine and we are going to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from this edge. Now make sure that you lift this part of the pleat up before you sew. You don't want to sew onto this pleat. You only want to sew the part that's sticking down with the basting tape on both sides. Here is our bag flap with the pocket attached. Again, just to reiterate to you, I'm going to fold this pleat aside and I will be stitching 1/8 of an inch down this side and then again 1/8 of an inch down the other side. I'm just riding the inner edge of that press-a-foot leg on the edge of my pocket. And that's my 1/8 inch. If you prefer, go ahead and mark it with chalk. That's up to you now. I've given you a few different methods of doing things now. It's up to you guys to choose which will work best for you. I've turned my work around and now I'm going to sew down the other side. Remember to move that flap out of the way, that flap for the pleat. Back stitch. Now, next thing I want you to go ahead and do is sew over those stitching lines one more time. I've just finished sewing down those sides a second time, and now what I'd like to do is I want to baste across the bottom of the pocket. Now that we're done sewing down the pocket, we're going to go ahead and sew the faux suede on the bottom here, and we're also going to put on the pocket flap. The pocket is now sewn down to the flap, and we can go ahead and remove these stickers. We do not need these stickers right now or ever again for these pieces. Now the first thing that we want to do to the flap now is we want to score a line, chalk a line, 1/2 inch up from the bottom of the pocket. It's also 1/2 inch up from the previous chalk line that you drew. Now what I'd like to do is take a piece of my basting tape and I'm going to run it along the edge of that top chalk line. So it's actually in between this chalk line and this chalk line, but I have the edge of the tape running along the edge of the chalk line that I drew here. So I'm going to pull this paper off. Now I have a piece of faux suede here. Don't ask me which is the right side and the wrong side. I have no idea. There is one side that's a little fuzzier, and I usually assume that that's the right side. So I am going to place the fuzzier side down. There's really not much of a difference though, so whichever side you put is really fine. And I am lining this faux suede up to the edge of this chalk line, the chalk line that's closer to the bottom. So I'm lining that up, and then I'm going to press it down into the basting tape. Now I don't really like to use pins on the faux suede. It's a little difficult to pin through. So just go ahead and use your basting tape for this. And then what you want to do is you want to chalk a line 1/2 of an inch up from the bottom of the faux suede. And this will be your stitching line. Now, the next thing that I want to do before I go back to the sewing machine is I'm going to chalk a line that's 1/2 inch above the top of the pocket. Then I'm going to take the pocket flap that goes to this pocket, and on this side here, on the contrast side, that's going to be the side that gets sewn down to the flap. I want to put a piece of the basting tape here also. And you want to stay within 1/2 inch from the edge of the pocket flap. So you got that on there, and you pull the paper off. And then you're going to line the pocket flap up on the edge of the chalk line that you just scored there. And you want to make sure that these edges are all even. Now that we have the faux suede on, now that we have the pocket flap on, we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew. One more mark before we do. We want to score a line 1/4 of an inch from the bottom of the pocket flap, and that will be a stitching line for us. Now so far all of our stitching lines have been 1/2 an inch, but for the pocket flaps we're only sewing 1/4 of an inch. So let's move over to the sewing machine now and sew these 2 lines. I'm at the machine. I'm going to sew my 2 seam lines. I'm going to sew this chalk line down the faux suede, and then I'm going to sew this chalk line on the pocket flap. Now if you prefer to use a 1/4 inch piecing foot here, go for it. Use your 1/4 inch piecing foot. You don't have to follow the chalk line. Now the faux suede can be a little difficult to sew through, but not by any means impossible. And again, that sharp 9014 needle helps out a lot. Remember, we're going through a lot of thickness here because we have the pocket underneath. I haven't tried using a walking foot yet on top of the faux suede, but I'm thinking that it probably would not work out well because of the texture. I don't think that the walking foot would glide over it very easily, but you certainly can give it a try and email me and let me know if it worked out for you. Clip my threads, put my work back in. I'm working on the faux suede. I actually worked with a 3.0 stitch length because of the thickness that I was working with, and that was straight needle, straight stitch, center needle position. And I'm going to stay now for the pocket flap at the 3.0. In general, when you're sewing this bag, whenever you're sewing through 3-4 thicknesses, you want to be at the 3.0 stitch length. I'm going to back stitch, stitching across that chalk line to the other end of the flap. Back stitch, and you're done. Now we're going to move back over to our pressing mat, and we're going to do a little bit more work here. The stitching lines on our pocket flap and our faux suede have been completed. Next, I'm taking a marker because I want to take that bulk out of the corner on the pocket flap. So you don't have to mark this, I'm just marking it to show you what I'm cutting out. Now, we want to lift this portion up here, and we had that tape under there, and if you can grab it, just pull it off. It doesn't need to be there anymore. It doesn't hurt anything if it stays in. It's just that I want to be able to lift this flap up so that I can do my cutting. And it should come right out for you. If it doesn't, if you're not able to get it out, don't worry about it. You can leave it in. Just lift up your corners, because you want to be able to trim those corners, and we're also going to trim along the length. Now, I'm taking the scissors and I'm clipping the black marks off that I made here. Like this. Right. Now that I've clipped off the corners, I want to trim down this seam allowance about halfway. Doesn't have to be pretty. Like I said before, no one's going to see this. And now that I've got that all trimmed down, I turn my pocket flap down this way, and I'm going to steam it in place. When we go back to the machine, we're going to sew about 1/4 of an inch away from this edge. I'm just going to top stitch here 1/4 of an inch away. Now that we have the pocket flap steamed down, we want to be able to tack down our faux suede. In order to do that, I have a can of Pam spray. This is the one that we like to use. But no matter which one you decide to use, you do need to follow the manufacturer's directions on its usage. So I'm going to go ahead and spray. And I like to spray on both my faux suede and my fabric. Okay, I've already used my Pam spray. Now if you do use Pam spray, I'm not talking about the Pam that we cook with. Don't take that spray and make a nice meal for your husband when he comes home tonight. And that's all we need to do for now. I'm just going to trim the excess faux suede off of the side here. And after we do that, we're going to join this with the other flat piece, and we're going to sew around the edges and the bottom. I'm ready to take the other flat piece and join it with this one here. So we put our right sides together. We're going to pin all around. We sew the sides, the bottom, the other side. And that's simply all we need to do. Once I get this pin, we'll go over to the machine and we'll stitch it out. Both of your fleece pieces have the circles marked at the bottom. It doesn't really matter if you want to sew from the front or the back. I'm sewing from the back right now. So just choose a side. You have the circles on both sides, so you have a choice which side to sew from. So we'll be moving over to the machine right now to sew the flap together. I'm going to start sewing the two pieces of the flap, right sides together. Remember to keep this top open. We don't want to sew across that top. That's where we're going to turn the flap from. So I put the piece into the machine and I'm straight stitch, center needle position, and I'm at a stitch length of 2.5 this time. I'm shortening down my stitch length because I don't have all that bulk to sew through this time. So I'd like a tighter stitch here. Back stitch. So right down the side. Remove your pins as you go along. Now, when you get down to the curve, I want you to switch to a 2.0 stitch length. Now the secret of getting a nice curve is you sew with a shorter stitch length. You go slowly and you pivot wherever you need to pivot. So in other words, you stop with your needle down, and if you need to turn to make that curve a little bit, you're able to turn by lifting up your presser foot. Try and stay exactly on the line. If you stay exactly on the line, you're going to get a really nice curve in the front when you turn that out. Once you get back on the straight line, you can go back to the 2.5 stitch length again. Stay right on your stitching line. Now that you're coming back up to the curve again, go down to your 2.0 stitch length. Go nice and slow. Pivot when you need to pivot. You'll know when you need to pivot because it's going to feel like you're at too much of an angle to get around the curve. And then as you get back to the straightaway, you can go back up to the 2.5 stitch length and then just continue sewing all the way back on up to the top. Now I've reached the top and I've back stitched a couple of times, And I'm done with that seam. Now we'll go back over to the pressing board and I'll show you how to turn this inside out. We finished sewing our seam all the way around. We've left the top open. And now I'm going to take my scissors and I want to trim about half of that seam allowance away. So just go ahead and cut all the way around. Just taking out some bulk here. You want to clip around the curve. I'm going to turn this now so I can reach it a little better. I'm clipping around the curve and across the bottom. And around the curve again, the second curve. A little harder to cut here because remember that faux suede is underneath. And then I'm going to clip up the top. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to take a series of snips in towards the seam line. You don't want to cut into the seam line, you just want to cut up to it. You want to take a bunch of nice tiny little snips. Now I'm going to snip around the other circle. Keep them pretty close together, maybe a quarter of an inch apart. What this does is when you turn the piece right side out, because you have all these little curves in there, it's going to round around that circle and you'll have a smooth circle on the other side. Now I've trimmed and I've clipped my corners. The next thing I want to do is steam these seams open. Use lots of steam. Try not to burn your fingers. I'll move this closer towards me. Now, when you open this up, you want to steam so that circle is nice and rounded there. Continue to steam that seam open around the edge of the bottom. I'm coming up to the circle again. I'm just going to pull it back before I get started with my steam. Pulling it back nice and firmly to keep that round edge. And now I'm going to steam up the side. Right now, I want to turn it over, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to steam open my seams. I've steamed the seams open on both sides, and now we're simply going to turn this right side out. So I'm going to go in and grab it. I'm going to pull it through. With my fingers, I'm going to push out those rounded edges as best I can. And then, after I do as much as I can with my fingers, I'm going to go in with my point turner. And I'm going to take this end, this rounded end right here, and I'm going to push with my rounded end until I get that fairly round. You can switch it to the pointed side and then try it a little bit with the pointed side. I'm going over to the other rounded circle now, and again I'm using my rounded end, and I'm pushing with the rounded end as much as I can to get that nice round shape. Just keep pushing on it. And then I'm going to take the pointed end and I'm going to nudge it out with the pointed end also. Now, we're going to work on that some more. What I'm going to do now is I am going to roll this seam back and forth with my fingers. Putting my hand inside to kind of grab that edge a little bit. And I'm just rolling it between my fingers. I want to see that seam right in the middle of the two pieces of fabric. Once I have it where I want it, I take my iron and I steam press it down. And I'm going to work all the way around the bag this way. I'm going to roll it, and once it's where I want it, I steam it. So I want you to work all the way around here now. Roll it. And you can feel underneath here, you can feel your seam. You don't want to feel the seam allowance, I should say, bunching up under here. If you feel it bunching up, just keep rolling it and flattening it until you feel that seam allowance lying flat. Steam. I'm going to roll again. What's making this lay nice and flat is because we press those seam allowances open on the wrong side. Makes this job much, much easier. Now, I'm going to turn this over because I don't want to put the iron on top of the faux suede. So now I'm going to roll this seam a little bit around the rounded edges. I'm going to press it down. And roll the seam between my fingers. Press it down. So just keep working all the way around that way. Now if your circle is not real round, you can go in with the point turner and poke some more. You can keep working on that until you get it to be exactly the way you want it to be. I'm probably not taking as much time with this as I normally would because the camera's rolling. But you have the luxury of taking as much time as you want. Okay, I've pretty much come all the way around now, and I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to have you go work on yours. I'm going to work on mine a little bit more. We want to top stitch the pocket flap down. And I'm going to sew this down. I'm just going to let the edge of my presser foot ride along the edge of the pocket flap. And I'm in center needle position, 2.5 stitch length. Back stitch. Just sew right across the top. Back stitch. And you're done. Right now, I'd like to show you how to put on the other half of this snap onto the pocket. First thing I do is take a black Sharpie and I color that nub that sticks out. And then I close the pocket and I press it down firmly. I want some of that black marker to get onto the fabric here. So it ended up right here, and I'm just going to darken that for you so that you can see where it is. Now the next step, I take the other half of the snap and I line it up over the black dot that I just placed right there. And I press those two prongs into the pocket on each side of the black dot. I just press it in. And now I have two indentations where I pressed it, and I'll mark that also with the Sharpie so you can see where those indentations are. Then I go ahead and I take my very, very sharp scissors and I just want to poke little slits into the fabric. Now, I am cutting into that little stitching line where we stitched in the ditch. And I don't want you to panic about that, because all you're going to do is take a little bit of fray check and run it along that line right around where you cut on both sides. So you're going to do it here and you're going to do it here. I have never, ever, ever had a stitching line come out after it's been fray checked, even if it's been washed. So now you go ahead and do your fray check. I'm going to put the snap in on mine. I'll fray check it later. Go ahead and slip the legs of that snap into those slots that you cut out. Then you take your little cover, you put it over the legs, and you press the legs down real hard. And you want to try and press them away from the inside of the pocket. And I mean away from this area in here. You want to press it into the fabric so that if you slip your hand in, you don't get snagged by those snaps. Now you close it, and it snaps right shut for you. Now I want to show you how to put the snap in that will be the closure of the bag flap. We're going to turn this over, and we're going to measure up from the bottom 1 1/4 inches, and we're going to make a chalk mark. So score a line all the way across, 1 1/4 inches up from the bottom edge. Now I want you to find the center here. So I'm going to measure how wide my piece actually is. And it's 12 5/8. So what I'm going to do is, since I can't divide evenly 12 5/8, I am going to mark in 6 1/4 inches from each side. And I put one mark here, and then 6 1/4 inches in from this side. I have another mark right here. So this thick chalk line is actually my center. And now I'm going to use the same kind of clover snaps that I used before, but this one's a little larger. It's a 3/4 inch snap. So what I'm going to do is, the flap is going to take the male piece, and I'm going to center those legs right above that chalk line, with the chalk line in the center of those two legs. And I just go ahead and I dig down and make my little impression there. Now I have two impressions in there from the little legs, and I'm going to blacken those for you so you can see them. Now I'm going to turn this piece around. I'm going to reach inside so that I can make my two slits. Be careful that you don't poke your fingers under there. Just making two tiny slits. Then I'm going to poke my legs through the slits, and I'm going to reach in and I'm going to put the cap over the legs. Now, you know what, guys? Don't ever forget to put the cap on, especially on this particular piece, because I did forget to put it on one time and the snap was absolutely worthless without it. And it's very difficult to get back at the snap once the bag is put together. So I have it on, and now I'm just bending it back. And you just have to feel for this now. And I have that in place. It's nice and secure now. I'm going to top stitch the bag flap right now, and I'm going to start up here. I'll be working 1/4 inch from the edge of the flap. I'm going to go down, going to go across the faux suede by stitching in the ditch. And then I'm going to go back up the top 1/4 inch from the edge of the flap. So I'm going to put this in my machine. I'm at a stitch length of 2.5. I start to stitch, I back stitch, now I'm going to pivot. I'm going to stitch in the ditch. Go a little slow here because you're about to start going over a lot of bulk. Now you're going to pivot, and you're going to stitch up the other side of the flap. You're going to back stitch a little bit, and then what I want you to do next is pivot, and I want you to baste across the top here. And now we are done preparing our flap. We're going to move on to the next piece.